What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jay's Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raffs, of course. We've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
I'm going to need our friend Victor Wembanyama to stop saving his heroics for the fourth quarter. I watched almost the entire first half of that game because I wanted to see him. And he did. I don't think I saw him score a field goal. He made a couple free throws. Now, he blocked Grayson Allen from 5 feet away. That was interesting to see. And then I woke up. I mean, they looked terrible. I thought, this is not an interesting game. And it was the Suns without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. And I woke up and the Spurs won. It's the second time he's done this. It's got to stop. It's not fair to us people on the East Coast time zone.
It's funny because the video that is circulating of Victor Wembanyama on this particular day is not something spectacular that he did. It's him guarding Kevin Durant and Kevin Durant scoring on him late in that game. I didn't watch any of that game, so I'm not sure I share your sentiment. I'm not nearly as frustrated as you are, but it would be nice if he would keep you in mind when you're trying to catch the first quarter and a half on the East Coast.
Yeah, because I'm not trying to stay up to watch the second half of that game. I just wanted to see him a little bit, and seeing him go at Durant was really cool. He got the better of Durant the first go around, and then Durant immediately came back and hit a step back on him, and it was a fun matchup, and he's fun to watch. But I wasn't about to watch the second half of that game based on the first half, especially when I wanted to go to bed anyway. He's got it. At some point, he needs to deliver in the first quarter for all the people on the Eastern and Central time zones. That's all I'm saying. It's for his own good, his own popularity.
You're right. He's struggling for popularity, and he needs more people on the East Coast to be a fan of his. You're
Correct.
Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon when we are recording this. Josh, we are 5 days away from the beginning of the college basketball season. It is November 1st. Season starts on Monday, November 6th. We have gone through all 6 power conferences in great detail. Now it's time to turn our attention to the country as a whole a little bit, try to cover a few things there. And that's what we're going to do this week, starting with this podcast. This week, we're doing 5 bold predictions. 2 podcasts we did right before the season last year. We did 5 bold predictions, and then your national preseason awards, Final Four, national championship, those obligatory predictions before we get into the college basketball season. So it is a week of national predicting, thinking, contemplating, and before we get into the regular season. Today we are 5 bold predictions. Josh, are you coming as like, are we talking like ghost pepper wings bold? Are we talking like mild sauce bold? Are you Parmesan garlic? Like we're really just for all of the, we're not tickling any feathers. Like where are we on the hot scale, on the bold scale going into this podcast?
I've got a couple that are not as out there and a couple that are fairly bold. So it depends on the specific one.
Fair. I like that. I
got a combo.
Sure. I feel like I preface this with the following every time we do this, but like there are a couple on here that I would go to bat for. There's a couple on here that I am not totally sure I believe. I like to play with, I take some liberties with that line because that makes bold predictions more fun, is ones that you could see happening. You wouldn't bet on it. It's very different than trying to pick, when we are previewing conferences, trying to pick a conference regular season champion. That it's no fun if I only came up with predictions that I completely believe in.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else we need to unpack before we get into these bold predictions?
I don't think so. I'm ready.
All right. Number 1, hit me.
I did this last year. It worked. I'm going to do it again. At least half of the teams picked to win high major conferences in the preseason will not do so.
Do you have the list in front of you?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we'll talk through the teams. First, would you like to guess how many of last year's preseason picks of the high majors won?
We did this last year too. Well, in the ACC, it would have been North Carolina, so that one
Correct.
didn't hit. There's no way it was Marquette last year,
Nope.
so that's 2. The Big Ten, I don't think was Purdue.
Nope.
Maybe it was. It
Nope.
wasn't?
It was
Okay, so
Indiana.
it was Indiana? Oh, that's so good.
I'm pretty
So
sure.
that's 3. Um, I think Kansas was picked to win the Big 12. Did they do that? Did that happen last year?
I don't believe Kansas was picked.
Really? Last year?
Mhm.
Who was picked?
Now I want to double check that. I believe it was Baylor.
We're talking like preseason polls, not on
Yes.
this here podcast.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. So the answer is either like 2, is either like 1 or 2. I'll guess 1.
That's the number I have, and now I want to double check about Kansas.
You're
And you think
you're probably right. I just default to, if I'm not totally sure, I just assume it was
Yes.
Kansas.
Baylor chosen Big 12 men's basketball preseason favorite. October
Wow.
13th, 2022.
How about that? So it
I
was
was pretty
1.
sure I checked them all. Yes.
So was it UCLA? Did UCLA win
Yes.
the
That was
Pac-12?
going to be my question. Who was it?
Gotcha. Okay. So have you circled which teams you think won't, or is it more of is this a percentage play? Is this just smart? This is smart gambling here in general, but do you have some teams circled that you're skeptical about?
Yeah. So let's talk. Now that we've done the trivia time, let's talk through these here. Okay. Pac-12, you got Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Arizona could very well win the Pac-12. I also wouldn't be stunned if the team with Caleb Love doesn't win its conference.
Yep.
So, therefore, that's an automatic question mark for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then, and I just have these I have them in alphabetical order. So, next, you've got Duke in the ACC. I do think Duke is going to win the ACC. That one, I don't feel. You could see a world in which the freshmen aren't quite ready and right. They didn't win it last year, and they're returning most of the same team. Now, I think you agree with me. That's not the one I'm looking at, but they're there. Kansas
and Duke being the most talented team in the ACC does not always mean that they win the ACC.
Exactly. Right. It wouldn't be stunning to see them not win. Kansas is now anchored by a player that has not had an awful lot of success the last couple seasons at Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I think Kansas wins the Big 12? Yes, that's the one. Actually, that's probably the one I'm most confident in. Then Marquette in the Big East. It's not that I doubt Marquette. It's that I just think any of those 3 teams could win. And you're basically doing a pick 'em. So give them a 40% chance because they did it last year.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you even decrease that because you're now taking Olivier Maxence Prosper off of that team. So, and the idea of trying to do it back to back, I don't feel great about Marquette's chances. Purdue, I feel very good. Now, Michigan State could end up being the best team in the conference, but again, Purdue's not the one I'm looking at. Mm-hmm. And then the last one is Tennessee. I will never feel incredibly confident about Tennessee's ability to win the SEC in a year where the SEC has a lot of good teams in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It might not be that one team where you're looking at Kentucky going, oh my goodness, they're head and shoulders above everybody, because that's just not where they are. Or in Alabama that's absolutely loaded. But between Kentucky, what Texas A&M is bringing back, that one I don't feel great about either. So I would kind of break it into 2 tiers. If I had to pick 3, Arizona, Marquette, Tennessee, but I think there's a world in which at least one of Duke, Kansas, and Purdue don't win as well.
I was watching back some of Tennessee's win at Michigan State in exhibitions. First of all, I can't tell you how down I am for charity games that are exhibitions between top 15 programs. We had 3 of them this weekend, right? 3. Purdue went to Arkansas. I mean, Illinois is not a top 15 team.
Yeah, but that was Illinois, Kansas was a really good game too.
And then you had a 1-point game in East Lansing. So I'm all the way here for that. I was watching that game back and they definitely have more pop than they did last year. I still have the same concerns about creativity. I was looking. I've been trying to put my finger on a stat that maybe that I can look towards for teams like Tennessee, where I talk about offensive creativity, and I think it's fallen on assists to field goals made ratio without like a truly like elite playmaker or a really dominant big. Because teams like Marquette were like they were like 8th in the country in assist field goal made ratio, but they have Tyler Kolek.
Right.
And UConn was like 2nd. Maybe it wasn't. They were top 10, but they have a guy like Adama Sanogo who
And
you're
then
just going to
Donovan
pass
Clingan.
right, and Donovan Clingan. So you're just going to pass to and Tennessee doesn't really have either of those guys.
Mhm.
Like Dalton Connect, excuse me, is really good. I was impressed by him, but I still think if the three pointers aren't going down, and they won't be like sub 230 like they were last year in that category, but I still think that they'll have days where they have the exact same issue. Anyways, I think the other part of it is that there are 4, if not 5 teams in that conference that I think could possibly win it.
Yep. Right.
I'm
Yeah,
going to stick on. Sorry,
and I
go ahead.
think it was easy even last year to okay, maybe you weren't feeling great about the Big Ten because neither of us thought Indiana was going to win.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like there were all of these very big question marks last season, and it still turned out that only one of the 6 won. There just is some of that always happens.
I'm going to stick on the conference thing. I've got a couple of conference things, a couple player things, and a coach thing. But we're on the conference, so I'm going to start here. I'm going to start in the ACC, and this is interesting because this was a conference that you said you weren't that worried about Duke. My first bold prediction is that North Carolina wins the ACC.
Mm.
I'm madly, hopelessly, helplessly in love with Elliot Cadeau.
As we all should be.
I'm in love with his game. I made a mistake of going through a game in which they're playing St. Augustine's, and now I'm convinced he's the best freshman ever. Not really, but the point being is that I think the experience with North Carolina is going to be so different this year, ironically with a guard who's also wearing the number 2. But on top of that, I think there's a bit of an overcorrection with North Carolina this year. In the same way that there was an overreaction to what they did in the tournament 2 years ago.
Sure.
And we've talked about that a million times. I think there's a little bit of an I think it's ridiculous that Miami is ahead of UNC in most preseason team rankings. I think they were ahead of them in ACC preseason polls. Duke got most of North Carolina. I think it was 13 first place votes for Duke, 2 or 3 for Miami, and 1 for North Carolina. But Miami was comfortably in second behind Duke in the preseason poll. I'm not totally sure. If North Carolina is just fine last year, then nobody is. I don't think anybody is saying, okay, you lost Jordan Miller, you lost Isaiah Wong, and you're still going to be better than this North Carolina team that has 2 first-team All-America caliber players. 2. Armando Bacot and RJ Davis are both absolutely capable of being first-team All-Americans, not first-team All-ACC, first-team All-Americans, at least in my opinion. And I just think that's a little bit of an overreaction. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am just too in love with Elliot Cadeau, and both of those things could be true. Both of those things I might even go, both of those things are probably true. But I think that the conversation with Duke and UNC would be a little bit closer if we could forget the context of last year, because on paper that team is going to score a lot of points. They have a very high floor offensively just because of Armando Bacot and DJ Davis. And if guys like Cormac Ryan, guys like Paxton Wojciech are making shots, then Harrison Ingram jumps off the page just on the floor in general. I think without context of last year that there would have been that they would have been thought of more highly. And as we pointed out, Duke being the best team in the ACC does not mean that Duke wins the ACC,
Mhm.
even if it's maintained throughout the year that Duke is the best team in the ACC. Those things usually don't add up together.
Mhm.
They don't happen at the same time.
And that's one of the interesting things about Duke this season is, can John Shire change that narrative?
Mhm.
And number 2, this is not a bunch of freshmen that need to figure it out, because that's always part of it, right? Is even the Zion team. We both said, well, clearly they're more talented than everybody, but are they going to show up every single night and be ready to go from day one? This is a bunch of guys who have been there before, with the addition of some super talented freshmen. So if this team can't do it, right, you can't say it's because they recruited a bunch of freshmen.
Mm-hmm.
Shire doesn't have that excuse because this team is going to lean on a bunch of guys who have played college basketball before.
Right.
And on the North Carolina side, wholeheartedly agree with you. To me, the question is, can they get to Duke's level? That's what we're talking about, is that their team too, can they elevate? And it's certainly possible they can. My hesitation is, well, I agree that there's been an overcorrection because there was a complete overreaction in the first place. We still haven't seen Hubert Davis put together a good team and a consistent good season, right? That's my other. If this was Roy Williams, I would feel a little bit differently. Not that they can't do it, and I would not be surprised at all if they're right there with Duke. But I also need to actually see this work before I jump all the way in. But I am with you that this team makes a lot more sense on paper. And if Hubert Davis is going to get this going and going to ease the concerns about whether he can actually do this in North Carolina, this is going to be the team that we're going to go, oh, there were just some chemistry issues, some fit issues. Now he's got a team the way he wants it, and they're just fine. Yeah, back to being North Carolina.
That's number one for me. What's number two for you?
Sort of similar. Kansas is not a number one seed.
Interesting. Okay.
This is one of my hotter takes that I'm not 100% convinced by. But here's why I say that. They do play Kentucky, UConn, Indiana, Missouri, and in the Maui Invitational during non-conference. So they could easily take 3 or 4 losses there. Not that they're going to necessarily, but they're probably not going, one loss through that if this is going to become anything close to an accurate prediction. And then the second part of this, let's just say they lose to UConn and they lose a game in Maui. And then they go win the Big 12. Does winning the Big 12 guarantee you a 1 seed this season? Right? Because in the past, if you win that conference, because of the gauntlet that it was, unless you did something horrible in non-conference, you're probably getting a 1 seed. And that's the cushion Kansas always has to fall back on is, yeah, they probably have 7 losses, but they're, 6 of them are the top 20 KenPom teams. 1 of them is at home. 1 of them's on a neutral floor. 5 of them are on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And they just have the most impressive body of work because they always schedule well and they don't typically lose to bad teams because they don't play that many. Now you're replacing some of those games with UCF and BYU, and you're not getting as many opportunities to play whichever team you want to throw in there. And that's part of it too, is who is that other? We don't have a bunch of guaranteed top 25 teams from the Big 12 outside of Kansas.
Oh, I think there's at least one more.
Oh, I definitely agree. There's probably 2 or 3, but it's not like we're walking into this going, oh, there are 2 to 3 top 10 teams coming from the Big 12, right?
I think there are 2, but I think Houston is a guarantee. I think Houston is a top 10 team. Yeah, but okay, after that, I'm not. I would be willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, that's probably the second team, sure. But it's just not. If you add teams, it's not as strong. Even with the 10 teams that were there, I could just see a world in which Kansas stumbles a little bit, and this doesn't go perfectly with this kind of reorganized roster, and they just can't compensate for it by playing Big 12 game after Big 12 game because some of those are now against lesser opponents, and you don't get to play Houston twice, Baylor twice, Texas twice,
I think my main argument would be who is getting the 3 number 1 seeds over. Like if Kansas wins the Big 12, who's putting together which other conference winners are putting together a good enough resume to take them over? And maybe the answer is it's a team that is a mid-major team that's going to win a ridiculous number of games, but I would, because I don't think the winner of the Pac-12, unless they win 20 games, 19 games, and Kansas wins it going 14-6 or something, that the Pac-12 gets the nod over them. I think the same is said with the ACC. So
I'm operating in a world where Duke is a 1 seed or North Carolina. That there is
okay.
a team that is consistent enough from the ACC. There's one from the Big Ten. There's one from the Big East, and then either it's a mid-major, it's a second Big East team, it's Michigan State. If you get a really good battle between them and Purdue all season, and one of them wins the regular season, one of them wins the conference tournament. That's kind of where I was. And then also maybe somebody from the SEC has a way better season than expected and ends up in that, right? Nobody was planning for Alabama last season, and Alabama was clearly 1 seed.
Right.
So I'm with you that I don't have a specific here are the 4 teams I think that get in ahead. There are some different ways I could see this playing out that keep Kansas off the 1 line, though.
Okay. That one is one I have a tough time getting all the way to.
Me too. That's definitely my boldest.
Here is one in a similar conversation. Number 2 on my bold predictions list is Florida Atlantic won't be the best mid-major outside of Gonzaga this year.
Okay.
I think that there are 2 teams, mainly one. This is about how good I think St. Mary's is going to be this year. St. Mary's has one of the, I mean, if you want to take Gonzaga out of the conversation, Randy Bennett is second to basically none when it comes to coaches at the mid-major level, especially when you take guys like Kelvin Sampson
I was thinking the exact same thing.
Out of the conversation. And we're just kind of past the point of Randy Bennett has success based on getting like lucky with a certain set of players. I think Aiden Mahaney is going to be awesome this year, and I think that I think they have a, like, at first I was like, really, are they really going to beat Gonzaga and win the West Coast Conference? Are they really going to do that? Well, they tied last year, and clearly I think people are probably a little lower on Gonzaga than they should be, but the more I think about it, the more I'm kind of into it. And this is also like, despite, even with Florida Atlantic going all the way to the Final Four, St. Mary's was still the better KenPom team last year, and there are some holes to fill in that roster. One, main one being Logan Johnson not being there anymore. But I think, I'll put it this way: I think that the best mid-major, true mid-major, which is weird to talk about when we're talking about a team in the same conference as Gonzaga, but when having, I think that FAU will have a counterpart in that conversation that is way closer than I think people are giving St. Mary's credit for on November 1st.
I'll buy that. I don't think the gap between those teams is very big at all. I agree with that general sentiment. Yeah, and Florida Atlantic's playing a pretty difficult non-conference schedule. I also think there's a world in which, even if I still feel like Florida Atlantic's the better team, that they won't have the more impressive resume come tournament time.
Sure.
Because, if St. Mary's wins the WCC and doesn't share it, unless something really special happens in the AAC and the non-conference goes fantastic for Florida Atlantic, you're probably going to have a hard time topping that.
Right.
And I was also I'm glad you brought it up, agree with your Randy Bennett idea that it's not like this is just because he happened upon a group of really good players, but also he's got a really, really good player. It's not like this team is lacking talent either.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. He is on my short list of like what he did against Gonzaga in conference play last year, kind of late in that game when they played at St. Mary's. I was watching it again this afternoon, and it was really, really something special. So I'm really excited about that battle in general and how big of a deal those games that St. Mary's and Gonzaga play are going to be. And I think we'll have those 2 teams in conversation, those 2 teams being St. Mary's and FAU for a lot of the season.
I agree with that.
Number 3.
Number 3. Well, this involves St. Mary's, so here we go. At least 3 of the last 5 teams in the AP preseason poll finished top 15.
Say that one more time.
At least 3 of the last 5 teams in the AP preseason poll are top 15 heading into the NCAA tournament.
Okay.
Those teams are USC, Villanova, St. Mary's, Alabama, and Illinois.
Sure. That's a list right there.
Yeah. And North Carolina is right ahead of them, which I also would expect North Carolina to be a top 15 team. USC, I really like this talent. Do I feel incredibly confident they're top 15? No, but I think they're at least top 20. Villanova would not be shocked at all. We talked about this on the Big East preview. If they are the 4th best team in the Big East and the 15th, 14th best team in the country. St. Mary's, like you just said, if they win, or even if they share it, they're probably top 15. Alabama don't have the firepower from last season necessarily, but I'm not betting against Nate Oates. And Illinois just beat Kansas. Now, I don't like putting much stock at all in exhibition games, but they did just beat the number 1 team in the country, and Terrence Shannon was really, really good. I could see 3 of those things working out very easily.
I didn't realize I hadn't put those 5 teams in conversation with each other, listing them out. But those are all 5 of those teams are teams that for one reason or another, I think that they would be ranked higher if the context of last season was different. Maybe not all 5 of them, but at least like Villanova, I think we're going to get to Villanova, but I think Villanova has a top 10 roster in the sport. And we'll call it the Jay Wright effect is why they're as low as they are. But you said 3 of the 5.
Yeah.
I'd buy that for $1.
And right ahead of them, Baylor, North Carolina, Texas. Followed by San Diego State and Kentucky. Those are 16 through 25.
That's a list right there.
Yeah.
Number 3 on my list, bold prediction number 3 is LJ Cryer is going to win Big 12 Player of the Year. I'm riding this all the way to the promised land. I think we've talked about Hunter Dickinson plenty. I think Hunter Dickinson is going to be very hard ultimately to keep off of a first-team All-America list at the end of the day. But that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about bold predictions. And I think that LJ Cryer is probably he's at the top of the list of Big 12 experience, right? Comes from Baylor to Houston. Big 12 experience combined with being put in a position to be significantly better from a statistics perspective than he was last year. We've talked about this a million times, so I don't need to rehash it in a massive way. But LJ Cryer has been at least 1B or 1C in terms of, if not 2 or 3, on the options for Baylor the last couple seasons. Last year he averaged 15 points a game, and that was with Adam Flagler and with Keontae George. It's Jamal Shed, it's LJ Cryer in the backcourt, and you and I both know that, and nobody is arguing that LJ Cryer will have to. Jamal Shed does other things, and LJ Cryer should just go and score. Yep. So I think Houston has a very real chance to win the Big 12 regular season, and if they do that, I think it's going to be hard LJ Cryer is going to be awesome if that happens. Mm-hmm. And if he's awesome and he's on the team that wins the Big 12 regular season, I think there's a very real chance that despite what's going on at Kansas, despite Hunter Dickinson coming in, that he is on the very short list of, which I guess makes it not that bold of a prediction if he's on the very short list. But I still think that he, as an individual player this year, is flying under the radar.
I'll take that straight up.
I like that. Look at the confidence.
If they're close, I don't even think they have to win. If they are close, within a game or 2 of Kansas, to me, there's absolutely a world in which he is just clearly the most important player in the conference. Because Kansas has, another big who's been really, really good in KJ Adams. And Kansas has other players who score. Houston will always need somebody to score. The one guy who scored is gone. And yes, Jamal said,
and also the one guy who scored, who's gone, was also a first-team All-American.
Yes, exactly. And Jamal Shed can score. I love Jamal Shed. The best version of Jamal Shed is not averaging 16 points a game.
Mm-hmm.
The best version of LJ Cryer is averaging 20...
18, 19, 20. Yeah.
Yeah, 22 maybe even.
Yeah.
If you ask me, who my prediction is, I would go with Cryer. Absolutely.
Love it. I don't even have to convince. This is great. This is fantastic. I'm riding on cloud 9. Okay, I've got three in the bag. You've got 3 in the bag as well, right?
Yep.
All right. What's number 4?
Here's my other one that I feel very confident in. Colorado's got. I've been banging this drum. We're gonna do it again. Colorado's finishing top 3 in the Pac-12. Sure. I couldn't go any higher than that. But why are they behind Oregon? Can you explain that to me, please?
They're behind Oregon because Dana Altman's the head coach of Oregon. They are behind Oregon because you're putting me on the spot here. They're behind Oregon because Oregon's starting 4 seniors and a junior and 2 7-footers.
Most of them were on a team that didn't play very well last season.
Sure. I'm just coming up with, Colorado isn't that sexy of a name.
This is my point.
This is a Colorado team that was 8-12. Sorry, 8-12 in the Pac-12 last year. All of these things probably add up. And Oregon was 12-8. So in a year where no one talked about Oregon for a single second, there were 4 games better in the Pac-12. That's probably why.
That's something. Yeah. Okay. That I'll buy. The rest of it, and I understand if you want to pick them 4th. I can't sit here and say I firmly believe they're better than USC, UCLA, and Arizona. Mm-hmm. But they at least got to be 4th in the preseason poll. You get your 2 leading scorers back. You bring back some role players. You have a top 5 recruit in the country, and Eddie Lampkin comes in from TCU. And maybe I'm just too high on Eddie Lampkin because I really, really like Eddie Lampkin.
That would probably be the other thing I would point to, is that you seem especially high on the guy that averaged 6 points and 6 rebounds.
It's a very specific skill set. But his skill set, when he gets going, is something to watch.
Sure.
His ability to just physically impose himself on games. And so I just look at this continuity in Tad Boyle, and I just go, they're at least top 4. Mm-hmm. So I'll make it a little bit bolder, raise the stakes, and say top 3. But I firmly believe either USC is not going to get it together, UCLA will struggle with all of the new pieces, Arizona won't be what they're supposed to be. They'll catch somebody and finish 3rd.
Yeah, I could poke a hole in all 3 of those teams.
Yeah.
And you could poke 7 holes in the Oregon thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not insulted that they would have been 4th. I am insulted they were 5th behind Oregon in the preseason poll. The other 3 I'm fine with. All
right. That's great. I'm in your ballpark here with number 4. The top 3 in the Big East at the end of the season will not be Marquette, Creighton, and UConn in some order. This is my Villanova bet. Mm-hmm. This is my if Jay Wright was the coach of this Villanova roster, they'd be a top 5 team in the country. Maybe top 8.
Yeah. And see, that's where I generally agree with you. And at the same time, which of those 3 are you knocking? The guy that just won the conference and the conference tournament? The guy that just won the national championship, or Greg McDermott?
Well, you and I both know that I'm not knocking Greg McDermott because I picked Creighton to win. UConn probably. I'm not as high on UConn as everybody else is. I get it. I also am just. You got. Final 4 most outstanding player, one of the best shooters in the country, and the glue guy that turned your
Yep.
team into a struggling Big East team in the middle of the season into a really effective glue best defender type. I mean, like and I haven't thought about it long enough to give you a comp on a different team, but it just feels like a lot that UConn lost,
Oh, completely agree.
and it might be like I don't think Nova's gonna win 17 Big East games, but if getting into third means finishing 14, I mean, like UConn won the national championship last year and wasn't even in the conversation for
Mhm.
the top of the Big East, not even in the conversation.
Yep.
So, and I've offered up my feelings on Max Prosper being overlooked and how difficult it is to repeat in the conference. And I think that it's a deep conference that's not going to see a team really run away and win 18 conference games. So 13-7, 14-6, getting you at least, a share of third, getting you solo third. I think it's a possibility. And I just think that, it's a team that's had bad injuries and like with all due respect to Chris Archidiakono is not a high major conference starting point guard, and that's what he was for most of last season. There was some weird stuff after Cam Whitmore left with Kyle Neptune, saying weird things about Cam Whitmore. So I'm not totally sure that was a great marriage.
Mhm.
Um, You've got a healthy Justin Moore who's capable of being the best player in any Big East game, as far as I'm concerned. And it's not like you brought in a bunch of highly productive mid majors. There's one mid major guy in there, but we're talking about guys that were at Washington State, guys that were at Maryland, guys that were playing high major competition last year, and all five of their projected starters, were double digit scorers last year. So I just think it's going to be like all of their guys outside of outside of Justin Moore, like between 6'7" and 6'8". So it's going to be switchy. It's going to be fast. It's going to be lots of threes. It's going to be those things that Villanova does. And I think, like I said, I think it's a really talented roster, and I don't think Kyle Neptune's getting as much credit for some of the momentum that was created at the end of last season that just fell short because the hole that they had dug themselves was so
Mhm.
big.
You don't have to sell me one bit on Villanova. It leads to top 15 team for me, probably top 10. I'm right there with you. Where I separate that and why I made the point about the other Big East teams is absolutely I can see a world in which they finish third. I'm just not super confident that they're actually on paper clearly better than those other three. They're in the conversation. To me, this is about the Big East has 4 of the top 10, 12 teams in the country. And we're acting like they have 3.
Mm-hmm.
Then it is Villanova is not getting properly placed in the Big East. Does that make sense?
Sure.
That's
and to be clear, when I'm going to put out Big East power rankings, and Villanova is going to be 4th. So this is not a I think they should be slotted in the 3 spot ahead of UConn, or that they're gonna finish second. I just think that the conversation seems to be top 3 in a lot of Big East conversations, and I think it's top 4.
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
What is my 5th one's a doozy. What's your number 5?
Mine's kind of wild too. This is my other bold one.
Okay.
San Diego State is not winning the Mountain West. Yeah, we gotta get some mid-major attention.
At the expense of who?
Well, you got 2 choices. I mean, Boise State was in the ballpark last year. And I know New Mexico kind of went into a tailspin and crashed pretty spectacularly. But that's 2 awful good guards. These are 3 really, really good teams. I don't think San Diego State's going to be terrible, or that they're going to completely underperform or underwhelm. I look at their roster, I look at Boise State, I look at New Mexico. They did lose some pieces. It's not like they're just bringing back last season's team. they're bringing back parts of it, but that's also a team that struggled to score and lost some of its scoring. I just don't see the star power and the firepower that, to me, the best. I mean, 3 of the best 5 players in that conference probably at least don't play for San Diego State. They're going to probably have a first team all conference guy, maybe 2. But even go look at the preseason predictions. It's not like they're, from a talent perspective, head and shoulders above everybody. So this is my kind of wild, let's just throw caution to the wind and have some fun. And I'm very locked into this New Mexico team. I was last season as well, and then they started losing all over the place, and then I couldn't talk about them anymore. I hope they can right the ship this time and make this interesting.
Yeah, a team that finished 75th in offensive KenPom lost Matt Bradley.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you wanted to sum it up in one sentence, that's
There
how
it
you
is.
would do it.
Yep.
And then you look at some of their conference wins, and some of them were you know, you lose to New Mexico in a game you only score 67 points. You lose to Nevada in a game you only score 66. Boise State 60. But then you look at some of their other wins. They beat Utah State 63-61. A good Utah State team. But, you know, they won a game 45-43 last year. They beat Fresno State 45-43. That's a team that finished 11-20. So I think it's kind of, you know, the margin is just not super. It's just not super wide, and I think they'll be very good. Not quite like I think it's ridiculous that they were ranked ahead of North Carolina. Like that's the ultimate for me this year. The top 25 is just a
Yep.
who did we see play basketball most recently,
Right.
and then we rank them like that. Because I just like when looking at it on paper, I have no idea how people think that San Diego State is better than North Carolina.
Yeah,
I have
to
no
me, they're
idea.
a borderline top 25 team, and I could say the same for Boise State and the same for New Mexico.
Sure. So I think it'll be close. I certainly don't need any talking into that being a conversation that when we get to February 1st, that who's going to win that conference is up in the air. Are you ready for me to get incredibly unhinged with number 5?
Oh boy.
Are you ready? This is going to be exciting.
Ready as I'll ever be.
This is John Calipari's last season in Lexington. This falls firmly in the I don't really believe this category. But here's the case. Kentucky hasn't been to the Sweet 16 since 2019. They haven't really had a team that was capable, that made me feel like they were going to get to the Sweet 16 since 2019, and maybe it would have happened in 20.
Have they won a NCAA tournament game since 2019?
Yes, I think so. There was a second round exit in there somewhere.
Okay.
But I'm also not positive about that. I feel like I would have heard that buzz sentence in more places if he hadn't won a NCAA tournament game. But I think it's only like one. Haven't been to the Sweet 16 since 2019. Kentucky coaches generally don't get that much. Like not going to the Sweet 16 for half a decade is not what Kentucky fans like. So I think that the relationship between the two parties right now is a little strained. Now, I think whether or not there was a really big blue blood program looking to put another coach in their head coaching seat would help this. I don't think anyone really jumps off the page other than Louisville, and John Calipari is not going to go to Louisville.
I mean, his assistant did.
I mean, I guess if he did, that would be incredible. Like that would be unreal if John Calipari went to Louisville. But
here's what I'll say: of the coaches in the John Calipari stratosphere, I would place him as the person most likely to do that. I don't think it's going to happen, but he doesn't mind playing the villain. That's all I'm saying.
Because I think Texas is in on the Rodney Terry thing. You know, that was we kind of flirted with that a little bit, but everywhere else, all the other blue blood programs, we aren't really in a spot of if that goes really far south, we're going to be looking for a new coach, right? Am I missing one? I don't think there is.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I mean, maybe a place like Oregon, but Oregon is like it just doesn't feel like a Calipari school. And I also
Michigan. I also
maybe
don't feel like it's a
Michigan,
Calipari
but
school.
yeah,
I also don't think that job's open next year.
I don't think so
The
either.
one was Texas.
Right.
And
I
I'm
also
with you
think
that
Michigan might be better than people think that they're going to be this year.
yeah.
So that's part of this is that makes it less likely than it already is. But so that's the nature of the situation in Lexington right now is definitely not sunshine and roses. The other part of this is kind of what we've alluded to a little bit in the SEC, but there are like 5 teams not named Kentucky that I could talk myself into winning this conference.
Mhm.
And that doesn't even include Florida, which I think is a sneaky, like Todd Golden, welcome to the party kind of team that they could kind of sneak themselves into at least, okay, that's a good team in the SEC conversation. I also just don't think we talk a lot about, awesome. You have a bunch of freshmen. Do the freshmen fit in together? Great. You have so many transfers. Do the transfers kind of fit in together? And 2 of the guys that jump off the page when it comes to Kentucky are Rob Dillingham and DJ Wagner. And I'm not totally sure that those guys are capable of playing together. And what I definitely know is that there's nobody on that roster. The last thing you need with a bunch of freshmen is not having a guy to facilitate the ball. And Kentucky doesn't have a guy to facilitate the ball. Like it's Antonio Reeves in the backcourt alongside of them, so he's not going to do it. He's going to shoot the basketball. Justin Edwards isn't. That's not how he's scouted either. So nobody really jumps off the bit. Is it just going to be a bunch of freshmen kind of running around and playing here your turn, here my turn, and you end up in you're 5th in the SEC, you're 6th in the SEC. And in our preview, we talked about this idea of this is how Calipari does it. We did the transfer portal phase. It didn't work. We're firmly back in dominating the recruiting trail, era. Shouts Taylor Swift. If it doesn't work, and we're another year into no Sweet 16, another year into a team that doesn't feel like it can win the SEC, another year into strain between the two, between the Lexington, Kentucky fan base, the Kentucky athletic department, then maybe it's just like, yeah, I'm kind of over it. And like I said, this falls very, very firmly into the I don't really think John Calipari is going to get fired after this year. This also includes either A, fire, B, decide to go somewhere else. So that's to make that clear. I didn't say that Kentucky is going to fire John Calipari. I said John Calipari's last season in Lexington, and that can be achieved in a couple different ways. So there's my attempt to piss off or find some new fans and Kentucky fans who might also be tired of John Calipari and want a new era in Lexington.
They did beat Providence last season. I forgot about that.
There you go.
There's your NCAA tournament win. And then they lost to Kansas State. So you were spot on with the second round exit.
W.
Yeah, to me, this is more about John Calipari walking away than it is Kentucky firing John Calipari.
I think you're right.
But if this goes poorly, I would not be surprised at all if that happens. Now, that's a big if. And the other interesting part of this, now I was reading Kyle Tucker's piece in The Athletic this morning, and he basically made the case that in talking to people, some of the former assistants and stuff basically said he kind of stopped coaching and stopped the player development part of it. He lost all of his assistants who were really, really important to this. People like Kenny Payne, and there's a whole list of them. And finally, now that he's restructured his coaching staff again, it feels more like Kentucky of the past when they had tremendous amounts of success.
Sure.
You combine that with a roster that feels much more like a Kentucky roster of the past, and maybe this all works out. It does seem like there have been some intentional changes and a recognition that this can't continue to go this way.
Right.
At the same time, I feel like you could have made the same argument last season, that at least from a schematic standpoint, and we talked about this consistently, things needed to change from year one with Sheboy to year two with Sheboy, and they didn't. So I'm not. This is why neither of us picked Kentucky to win the conference. They no longer get the benefit of the doubt for me of, oh, they're going to figure this out, because they haven't consistently the past few seasons. But I feel like if we're going to get back to Kentucky being what we expect under Calipari, that has to start this season. Not that they're going to make the Final Four, win the national championship, but you have to feel like this is going back in the right direction. Otherwise, I would put it at 52%. If they lose, if they're a 7 seed, lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament or something like that, then he walks away. Because I don't think he wants this to continue, and I don't feel like he feels obligated to continue unless this is working for everybody.
The combination of the two is why this is interesting to me, because what do you do if this is a tough year to have all freshmen in the SEC and in college hoops in general?
Mm-hmm.
In this, like, there are just more, because of the transfer rule, there are just more top teams with veteran talent than there used to be. It's just much harder to have freshmen that are so much more talented than insert veteran experienced college basketball team here, that you really have a leg up just because of your talent.
Or Duke, who's bringing back 2 potential All-Americans
right.
as sophomores.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're bringing back Antonio Reeves, good, not great college basketball player, and Trey Mitchell, who should be a very, and which is why I'm even kind of in on this team at all. If Trey Mitchell wasn't here, I'd be talking about Kentucky missing the NCAA tournament. That would be my bold prediction, because until he went and found him late, there were really big questions.
Yeah,
but
the transfer portal and roster construction did not go particularly well this summer.
No. The top 7 in their projected rotation, 2 of them have scored a basket in college basketball. It's just not, that's almost never how it's worked, unless you happen to get Karl Anthony Towns on your team or Devin Booker on your team at the same time. Now, and I'm not sure either of those guys are on this Kentucky team.
Yeah. Now, the other interesting part of it is a lot of those teams were hyped as preseason number 1 in the country, preseason number 3, whatever it was. And then they were good, not great. And so they were a disappointment, right? If they ended up as a 3 seed. If this team is a 3 seed, it feels very different to our conversation earlier about North Carolina, right? Where look at what Cal did with all these freshmen in a year where the SEC is really good and really deep. And they got if they get to the Sweet 16, they give themselves a chance, lose a close game to, we'll just say Marquette, for example, in the Elite 8 or something like that. UCLA, whoever. I guess UCLA wouldn't be as great of an example because they've got a bunch of freshmen too. But, Marquette or Creighton or whoever, then it feels very different. And you feel like, okay, there's at least something going in a positive direction here. And maybe some of these guys, 1 or 2 or 3, these guys decide to stay for year 2. And now all of a sudden you're in a position like Duke was this season, where, oh my word, they have 5-star recruits and potential national player of the year coming back after a really good freshman season. They brought another recruiting class in. They added this transfer. And now all of a sudden Kentucky's really in business. So it's just a very interesting, what is good enough with this team that nobody's looking at going, that's the best team in the country on paper.
The thing about Kentucky, I think, is usually the guys that Calipari gravitates towards in recruiting, they're either guys that so obviously have to go to the NBA, or you're just not that impressed by in general. And so they don't, very rarely do they have a guy like Kyle Filipowski that was really good last year.
Yep.
but he doesn't exactly fit into a archetype that is sought after at the NBA level, because that's why he's back.
And I, I think I'm curious to see how this goes for him this season, because he can do some. It's not like he is a unskilled, unathletic big.
No,
but he is not a prototypical 6'8" wing, 3-and-D 3-level scorer kind of guy.
Right. It's the same reason why Luka Garza was a back-to-back national player of the year.
He's such a better athlete than Garza.
Sure, but he's not the archetype that, I mean, if he was, he wouldn't be here.
Right. You can't look at it, and it's almost the Wembanyama thing of just what exactly, and I'm not trying to compare it to, but what exactly does he, right? He's not a rim protector. He's not a sharpshooter. He just does a lot of things well and presents matchup problems because he's so tall and can handle the ball and can pass and can shoot and do all these things. But you're right. It's not we've got ourselves a rim protector. We've got, I guess, and that's what Wembanyama is doing. Is that man is just a incredible headache when you're trying to shoot the ball. Filipowski's not that guy, right? There isn't that one thing to point to. Go, this is how he translates. I still think I'm very optimistic about his NBA future. I'll say that.
The point just being is that Cal Filipowski was light years better than Chris Livingston last year. Chris Livingston got drafted in the NBA draft.
Yep.
And Cal Filipowski is playing college basketball again.
Right. And that's also part of Cal being so focused on NBA development, right? Is that's just kind of understood. If you can go, you go.
Right.
So that's a fair point that maybe this team, it doesn't matter how it goes. Most of these guys are gone. I could see a world in which the 6th and 7th guys want a chance to be the stars, and all of a sudden you have a good season. Maybe there's a way that this really turns around quickly for Kentucky, but that's a big if.
That's my last one.
Going out with a bang.
There you go. You got anything else?
I'm going to need your Columbus Crew to take care of business here. I have them winning MLS Cup. Just wanted you to know that.
Sure. You know how many seconds of Columbus Crew action I've watched this year?
0.
That's correct. So I'm locked in. Clearly, I'm locked in. I don't see what the issue is, but okay. I'll talk to him. I think that's a good pick, though. Knowing absolutely nothing, I think that's a really great pick. There you go.
That's all I got.
The Nuggets won a title too. That was the whole thing, right? Yep. I want the Denver Nuggets of the MLS. Yep. You gave me the Crew, and the Crew won a title. Yep. And now the Nuggets won a title, so it's all good. It's all gravy at this point. All right. That's all I have for you today. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod. And we'll be back in a couple days with preseason awards, first team All-Americas, that kind of thing. So we will see you then. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.